Preparing the 3D printed parts. Here are the 3D printed parts of your kit. You'll also have received a bubble wrap bag of screws, nuts, servo motors, a solenoid and other bits and pieces. Depending on your hair preferences, you'll either have received a smooth head top if you want to order a doll's wig of your own, or a 3D printed hair and bun. The first thing to do is to cut off the 3D printed rafts that allowed the 3D printer to print each part properly. I'd suggest using a round-ended scalpel as they are really thin, although you could use a craft knife. I'd recommend having several spare blades, as scalpel blades can snap really easily. A cutting mat so you don't damage your work surface, and a pair of safety goggles in case a snapped blade flies towards your head. Start by rocking the scalpel up and down whilst easing it between the 3D printed head part and its raft. Always assume the blade will suddenly slip and keep fingers and hands well away. The 3D printed raft can be discarded. Now examine the head for any unwanted bits of filament that may be sticking out and cut them off. Check the holes and use a pointed scalpel to clean up their edges. Cut off any excess material from around the eyeball support and any excess filament around the eye sockets. Also remove any excess filament from around the mouth. The mouth moving lever has been 3D printed with a support structure that needs to be removed. Cut its raft off with the scalpel, then use a pair of pliers to pluck off the support structure. Cut off any remaining support structure with a scalpel and clean up the screw hole with a pointed scalpel. It should look like this. Don't worry if it's not completely smooth, as this part won't be seen. Clean up the next screw holes to ensure the screws can be screwed in easily. The jaw uses two metal dowels as pivots, so cut away any excess filament from within the channels where they will sit. Assembling the eyeballs. Now it's time to prepare the eyeballs and eyeball gears. Having removed the rafts, cut off any excess filament from the eyeball gears so they are completely smooth. Do the same for each eyeball. They must end up spherical with no unwanted bits protruding. Once you have cleaned up the eyeballs and the eyeball gears, check the eyeball shafts fit into their respective eyeballs by pushing the eyeball gear that has a dot on the end of its shaft into the eyeball that has a dot on its back. This is the right eye. Do the same for the left eye that doesn't have dots. If they easily fit together, take them apart and one after the other place a small spot of superglue within the hole in the eyeball and push in the correct eyeball gear. The gear with the dot on the end with the eyeball with the dot on its back, which is the right eye, and the undotted parts for the left eye. Tightly hold the eyeballs and their gears together for about a minute while the glue sets. Assembling the jaw. Now it's time to fix the two parts of the jaw together. Remove any excess filament from the jaw and the rectangular parts that will be glued into it. Take special care to remove any excess filament that would stop the rectangular part pushing into the slot. Push the rectangular part into the slot and check it is horizontal and vertical to the jaw. Once it lines up properly, apply a drop of superglue in the slot at each end, and push the rectangular part firmly into place, ensuring it is horizontal and stands vertically. Hold it firmly in position for about a minute while the glue sets. Preparing the base and optional 3D printed hair. The base has quite a large raft, so cut a round from the outside, bending away the cut off raft so you can continue to cut to the centre. Cut off any rough edges from around the curved slot. This is where the wires will exit, so it's important they can move freely. With a pointed scalpel, remove any excess filament from around the hole where the steel balls will be inserted and the outside of the hole. Having cleaned up the ball hole plug, check it fits properly in the ball hole. If you've opted for the 3D printed hair rather than opting to purchase your own wig, cut around the raft, bending it out of the way so you can reach the centre. Do the same for the hair bun. Painting the base. Now it's time to prepare and paint the 4 parts that make up the bearing at the bottom of the neck. Personally, I like to paint these parts to look as though they are made from brass, but you can obviously paint yours any colour you wish. If you want a really smooth finish, use some wet and dry abrasive paper to smooth the surfaces before painting. Once you are happy with the finish, you'll need some masking tape to protect the parts that shouldn't be painted. To make these instructions clear, I'm going to use red insulating tape instead. We don't want paint within the ball races, as it could clog them up and prevent the neck from turning freely. So wrap masking tape around the centre part of the bearing so its upper edge lines up with the upper edge of the ball race, but leaves the top of the bearing uncovered, as this can be painted as it will be seen. For the outer part of the bearing, wrap masking tape around the inside and then use a scalpel to trim around the top of the ball race. This is fairly easy to do, as the scalpel will follow the indentation of the ball race. Remove the excess masking tape and you can see that we again paint the parts we'll see, but not the actual ball race. Before painting, I'd suggest vacuuming the parts to remove any dust with a brush head. The dog ate mine. Place the parts to be painted on some cardboard or similar so that they can be rotated between each coat. Ensure that you have protected any surfaces that you don't want to paint. Make sure there is sufficient ventilation and wear a mask to avoid breathing in excess paint. In the UK, I always use Plasticoat metallic brass spray paint, as it gives a very realistic, hard-wearing finish. Whichever paint you use, ensure you read and follow the manufacturer's instructions. If you want to check the paint is okay to use on 3D PLA plus filament, try painting one of the rafts you previously cut off. Every time you use the paint, shake the can for a minute to ensure the paint is properly mixed. Lightly paint the 4 parts from one side, then rotate them by 90 degrees and paint them again. Repeat until all 4 sides have been painted. If you spray on thick coats of paint, they will probably run and will take ages to dry. Wait for the paint to dry. Plasticoat metallic brass paint can be overcoated after about half an hour, so apply 4 more light coats. Assembling the base bearing. Once the paint has properly dried, remove the masking tape. Place the centre of the neck bearing within the outer base and start pushing the steel balls into the hole. As more are pushed in, they'll help the centre to line up properly. There is room for 33 steel balls, although I included an extra one in case one gets lost. Push the steel ball plug into its hole and check that the centre of the neck bearing can be turned freely. If it's slightly jerky, file the top of the steel ball plug smooth with a needle file or similar. Don't file off too much, and keep checking whether the bearing spins freely before filing off any more. Once it turns freely, find the M3 by 16mm brass cheesehead screw and fix the steel ball plug in place. Checking the eyes move. You'll need the head, the eyes, the eye support and two M3 by 12mm steel cheesehead screws. Insert the right hand eye with the dot on its back into the right hand eye socket. Then insert the left hand eye gear. If they won't easily fit into the eye sockets, rotate them so the toothless part of each eye gear faces the front, and this will make it easier to insert them. Screw the eye gear support in place and check the eyes rotate freely by turning the eye gears. If they don't rotate freely and stick, unscrew the eye gear support, remove the eyes and check there is no excess filament around the eye sockets and that the channel in which the eye gears sit is smooth, as are the eyes and gears. Reassemble the eyes and check they now turn freely. If not, repeat the process. Once they turn freely, remove them from the head. Painting the head. You'll need the head, neck, eyes and jaw. If you've opted to purchase your own wig, you'll also need the top of the head. The first thing to do is to mask the eyeballs, so we'll only paint the eyelids. As before, I'm using red insulating tape to make the photos clear, but I'd recommend using masking tape. Wrap the tape around the eyeball so it follows the line of the eyelid, which is straight. Then mask off the rest of the eye gears so only the eyelid remains unmasked. As before, arrange the parts somewhere suitable. The jaw can be held vertically with some masking tape. This time I'm going to use Plasticoat Satin Porcelain spray paint, but you can obviously use any colour of your choice. Having read and followed the manufacturer's instructions, shake the can for a minute after you hear the mixing bowl start to rattle. As before, spray a light coat from each side. A heavy coat will run and take ages to dry. Wait for the recommended time for the paint to dry and apply a second coat. Once the paint is dry, leave the masking tape on the eyes for use later. Applying cosmetics. Graphite powder. Once the head and eyes are completely dry, it's time to add some decoration. You can skip this part if you want a plain face, but I've found the automaton head looks much better with a dark area around her eyes and on her eyelids. I'd recommend using graphite powder as it's readily available and easy to apply, blend and remove if it goes wrong. It's used by locksmiths to lubricate locks as oil attracts dust. It's also very useful for lubricating steampunk machines. Pour some graphite powder onto some scrap paper, cover the end of your finger in it and dab it around her eyes, blending and smoothing as necessary. If it doesn't look right or goes in the wrong place, it can be easily removed by blowing it away, vacuuming, or removing it with masking tape or blue tack. Once you're happy with the dark area around her eyes, apply plenty to her eyelids using the masking tape you applied for painting. To fix the graphite powder in place, I'd recommend using matte or satin craft spray varnish. Follow the manufacturer's instructions. Shake the can for a minute before use. Before you spray the head and eyes with the varnish, check that it doesn't react with the plastic or paint by spraying some onto one of the rafts you previously removed or some other inconspicuous area. If it covers properly, arrange the head and eyes somewhere suitable. The eyes can simply rest on their flat backs. Just spray on a very light coat of varnish, as this is all that's necessary to fix the graphite powder in place. If you spray too thick a coat, it could run and ruin the effect. Leave the varnish to dry properly before handling the head or eyes. 24 hours would be best. Fixing on felt. Find the 4 pieces of felt in the fixings kit and the eye motor support, the jaw and the jaw operating lever. The felt helps to reduce the noise made by the mechanisms. You'll also need a pair of tweezers and some multi-purpose adhesive. Don't use superglue to stick on the felt, as it soaks through and makes the felt solid. Apply a small amount of the adhesive on the inside top of the jaw operating lever and position one of the 3 smaller felt squares in place. Don't use the larger felt rectangle. Gently squeeze it in place. Now stick the other 2 smaller felt squares onto the eye motor assembly as shown. Next, stick the larger felt rectangle into its rebate in the jaw mechanism. Decorating the jaw, lips and eyes. Using a permanent black marker or some suitable black paint, colour the inside of the mouth as shown. When she opens her mouth to speak, this will make the inside of it dark. To clearly define the shape of her lips, I recommend painting them. Use some gloss modelling paint or similar, a very fine paintbrush and some paint thinners to keep the brush clean. Thoroughly mix the paint, as gloss paint often separates. Use some wood or a book to support the head and your hand to allow you to carefully paint within the lip line. Shining a light over her head to cast a shadow can be a useful way to clearly see the lip line. It should look something like this. Repeat the process for the lower lip. Gloss paint usually takes a long time to dry. I'd recommend leaving it for 24 hours. Once the eyelid varnish has dried, remove the masking tape. To colour the iris and pupil, I recommend using a coloured permanent pen and black permanent marker, as they make it easy to follow the slight rebate around the iris. However, you could use modelling paint and a fine brush. Follow the rebate around the outside of the iris with the coloured permanent pen. To get a richer colour, just go over it several times. To colour the pupil, carefully dab the black marker onto the raised pupil. Several dabs and it should become shiny. The finished eyes should look something like this. Assembling and painting 3D printed hair. If you opted for the 3D printed hair, find the hair, bun and some super glue. Check which way round the bun needs to be glued on, then run a bead of super glue around the join and carefully position the bun in place, holding it firmly while the glue sets. I'm using another brand of brown satin craft paint. Read and follow the manufacturer's instructions. Shake the can for a minute before use. As before, I'm lightly spraying each side, leaving the paint to dry for the recommended time and then applying a second coat. Once the second coat is dry, I'd recommend turning the hair over to ensure all the visible hair is painted. Extending motor wires. Find the DC motor and solenoid in the collection of kit parts. Remove the solenoid from its bag, leaving the iron core and coil spring in the bag. Be very careful not to lose the coil spring. The wires on the DC motor and solenoid are far too short to reach outside the head, so we need to extend them. You'll also need a pair of wire cutters. There are many types, just pick the type you have to hand. A soldering iron and solder, and 4 40cm or 16-inch lengths of suitable wire, ideally in red and black and some other colour. I use 7 by 0.2mm hookup wire as it's flexible and conducts well over an amp. Cut off the pre-soldered ends of the DC motor wires as they're a bit short to join, and cut off the plug on the solenoid wires. Bare the ends of all the wires and twist the individual strands together. Join the new red and black wires onto the DC motor wires by twisting the ends together. Alternatively, if you're an experienced solderer, tin the ends and solder them together. Heat up the joints with the soldering iron as you run some solder onto the joint. Do the same for the solenoid. Use the single colour wire to extend its wires, as it doesn't matter which way round they are connected, and you'll always know which are the solenoid and which are the DC motor wires. Insulate the joints with some heat shrink sleeve or insulating tape if you have none. With their new wires attached, the DC motor and solenoid should look like this. Installing the DC motor and solenoid. You'll need the DC motor, the motor mount with the 2 felt pads, the motor gear, the 2 M1.7 by 4mm cheesehead screws, and a suitable screwdriver. It doesn't matter which pair of holes you use to fix the motor in place. Don't over tighten the screws as they are so small. Push on the gear as shown until the gear is level with the motor spindle. Now find the solenoid housing, the M3 by 6mm cheesehead screw and the M5 by 8mm grub screw. You'll also need a 2.5mm Allen key and flat bladed screwdriver. Screw the M3 by 6mm screw about halfway into the top of the solenoid housing. Screw the grub screw into the threaded adjustment hole. Take care to ensure it doesn't screw in at an angle. Screw it in until it's just level with the other side. Push the solenoid halfway into the hole as shown, ensuring the solenoid's wires exit vertically. Assembling the neck. You'll need the painted neck, the painted and assembled base bearing, the painted servo motor support, the 4 countersunk M3 by 25mm steel screws, the M3 by 12mm steel cheesehead screw, and the servo motor bag without the look up and down servo label. Keep the servo bag with the look up and down servo label for later, as it has a control horn drilled out to accept a wire linkage. Screw the 12mm screw part way into the threaded hole in the top of the neck. Don't screw it in all the way, as you'll need to insert the neck pivot rod later on. Remove the servo motor from the bag, as you need to set it to its 90-degree middle position and the short control horn. You can set it to the 90-degree position by connecting it to some sort of servo controller or microcontroller. Remove the horn and push it back on so it lines up with the centre of the servo motor. Alternatively, push the horn onto the servo motor spindle and gently move it clockwise and anti-clockwise until you find its limits of movement. Rotate it to the middle position, remove the horn and push it back on so it lines up along the centre of the servo motor. Once the horn is lined up properly at the 90-degree position, screw in the small fixing screw from the servo motor's bag to hold the horn in place. Rotate the base bearing so the horn slot lines up with the servo motor cutout as shown. Place the servo motor into the cutout so the horn fits into its slot. Make sure the circular decal rebates on the painted servo motor support are facing upwards, and then carefully feed the servo motor's 3 wires through their slot before pushing the servo motor support into place. Feed the servo motor's wires and plug through the hole in the base so they stick out underneath. Holding everything together, poke one of the 25mm countersunk screws through the hole from underneath. Line it up with the correct threaded hole in the neck and screw it in. Insert another 25mm screw into the other visible hole from underneath and screw it in until tight. Now slowly rotate the neck anti-clockwise to its limit so another screw hole appears underneath. Push in another of the 25mm screws and screw it in until tight. Now slowly rotate the neck clockwise until the final screw hole is accessible from underneath, and push in and tighten the fourth 25mm screw. If you have a servo motor controller, you can check to see whether the neck will rotate from right to left. It should face away from the steel ball plug at the back when centred. If it doesn't, remove the servo motor and reset the horn to the servo centre position and try again. Installing the jaw mechanism. You'll need the head, the jaw, the solenoid support, the jaw moving lever, the M2 by 12mm countersunk brass screw, and the 2 10mm long steel dowels. You'll also need the solenoid core and spring from its bag, some masking tape, a 2.5mm Allen key, tweezers, a small flat-bladed screwdriver and a pair of pliers. Using a pair of pliers, position the solenoid support within the head, ensuring its wires are facing towards the front of the head. Slide the solenoid support into the slot either side of the mouth, so it looks like this with the wires lined up vertically. Now push the solenoid into the rebate in the nose so it lines up with the edge of the solenoid support. Check the solenoid's wires fit into their slot. If everything lines up, tighten the brass screw gently to hold the solenoid in place. Use a piece of masking tape to hold the jaw in place so the jaw's pivot slots line up with the pivot holes in the head. Position the 2 10mm steel dowels in place so their ends sit within the holes in the head. Remove the solenoid's core and spring from the bag, being very careful not to lose the spring. Place the spring over the solenoid core as shown and lower it into the solenoid. it should freely spring up and down. Now position the jaw lever over the dowels and solenoid core and line up the M2 brass countersunk screw with the threaded hole before tightening it. If the steel dowels move out of alignment so the jaw lever doesn't sit flush, loosen the screw, realign the dowels and retighten the screw. Once everything is aligned and tightened, remove the masking tape and check if the mouth opens and closes freely. Adjusting the mouth. Now insert the 2.5mm Allen key into the grub screw and tighten it until the mouth doesn't close fully. Loosen the grub screw a little until the mouth just closes. This will reduce the noise of the mouth opening and closing. Installing the eyes. You'll need the eyes, the eye motor assembly, the eye gear support and 4 M3 by 12mm steel cheesehead screws. Place the eye with the dot on the back in the right hand eye socket and the other eye in the left hand eye socket. If they won't easily fit, rotate the eye gears so the cut-off gear teeth both face the front. Position the eye gear support and the two 12mm screws and tighten the screws. Check that the eyes can rotate freely. If they don't rotate freely, remove them and trim away any excess filaments from around the eye shafts. Once they rotate freely, pass the solenoid wires up between the eye motor's head supports. Use the other two 12mm steel screws to fix the eye motor housing into place, and pass the eye motor's wires between the eye motor's head supports. Move the eye motor's gear away from the eye gears so they are free to turn. Use a screwdriver to rotate both eyes so they are in the open position. Holding the eye motor gear in its furthest clockwise position, move the motor housing and gear towards the eye gears so they just mesh, and tighten the adjustment screw. Now check whether the eye gears and motor gear rotate freely, opening and closing the eyes. If they are stiff or get stuck part way round, loosen the adjustment screw again, move the motor gear slightly further away, tighten the adjustment screw and try it again. It can take a while to position the motor properly so the gears don't mesh too tightly but equally remain meshed. Attaching the head to the neck. You'll need the assembled neck and head, the servo motor bag labelled Look Up and Down Servo, the 52mm long head pivot, the steel wire servo linkage and the steel wire linkage pivot. You'll also need a small posi-drive screwdriver and a way of controlling the servo motor. Remove the servo motor from the bag along with the 3 small screws and the half servo horn. Notice the second hole along has been drilled out to accommodate the wire linkage. If you can't control the servo motor electronically, slowly rotate the horn anti-clockwise. Otherwise, use a controller to rotate the servo to its anti-clockwise limit. If the horn has been pushed onto the servo motor spindle, carefully pull it off without rotating the spindle. It must remain rotated to its anti-clockwise limit. Now position the servo motor as shown with its wires passing downwards through the slot. Use the two larger screws to fix the motor in place. Hook the wire servo linkage through the larger hole in the horn as shown. Slide the servo linkage pivot through the loop in the wire linkage. Attach the wire linkage assembly to the neck by sliding the linkage wire into the slot in the neck, and then by pushing the linkage pivot into the two holes in the back of the neck. The linkage and servo horn need to be positioned as shown so that the head pivot can be passed through the holes in the neck. Hold all of the wires out of the way and visually line up the neck pivot holes. Now push in the 52mm long neck pivot so it passes right through to the other side. Gently tighten the head pivot fixing screw. Ensure all the wires are out of the way and that the head is looking down, resting as far down as it will go. Use a pair of pliers to align the horn with the servo motor spindle and push it on. Don't try and move the head up and down manually, as doing so will damage the servo linkage. You'll need to control the servo motor electronically to check that the horn is in the correct position on the servo motor spindle. The head must be looking down with the servo motor fully anti-clockwise and fully upwards with it fully clockwise. If this isn't the case, pull off the horn, rotate it slightly to line up with the next shaft spline and push it back on, then test it again. Once it's working properly, screw in the horn fixing screw. Positioning the wires. Wrap the cable tie around the wires and the motor support as shown. Check the solenoid wires are pushed in far enough to ensure they are sitting inside the cheek and cannot touch the eye mechanism. Then tighten the cable tie and cut off the excess. Find a spare piece of wire and push it through the hole in the base so it comes up inside the neck towards the front. Use some tape to attach it to the servo motor plug and gently pull the plug and wires through the hole underneath. Now push the spare piece of wire through the hole again, but this time make sure it appears through the triangular shaped hole by the head pivot fixing screw. Fix the solenoid and eye motor wires to it with some tape and gently pull them through the hole in the base. Bend the wires towards the outside of the head by the cable tie so they remain well clear of the servo motor, horn and linkage. Fixing on the head top. If you've opted to purchase your own wig and have the head top in your kit, find the two M3 by 20mm cheese head brass screws. Position the top of the head, check no wires are trapped in the joint and screw in the two screws to hold it in place. So it looks like this. A 9-inch to 10-inch doll's wig should fit perfectly. Fixing on the 3D printed hair. Position the painted 3D printed hair above the head and firmly push it down into position. It should look like this. Some ribbon can be wrapped around the joint between the hair and bun to hide it. Congratulations on completing the assembly of your automaton head. The next set of instructions will explain how to control it.